Good morning and welcome to the DGAP morning briefing. I'm Henning Hoff, Executive Editor of Internationale Politik Quarterly. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine entered day 923, 923. Russia's brutal attacks on civilians continued, and yesterday we saw a substantial reshuffle of the Ukrainian government, which included Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba. But this morning, we are not focusing on Ukraine as such, but we look back to last Sunday, to the regional elections in Saxony and Thuringia. As predicted by the polls, the far-right AfD enjoyed a strong showing, coming first in Thuringia with 32.8% of the vote, against the second-place CDU with 23.6%. In Saxony, it was the other way around, but much, much closer. The AfD with 30.6% against the CDU's 31.9%. And it's not only the AfD which had a good day. The Bewegung Sahra Wagenknecht, BSW, or the Sahra Wagenknecht movement, which only launched at the beginning of this year, won 15.8% in Thuringia and 11.8% in Saxony. The BSW, but also the AfD, accentuated their contrarian foreign policy, including no more weapons for Ukraine, diplomacy and peace negotiations now, and also strong opposition against the deployment of US middle-range rockets from 2026, which Chancellor Olaf Scholz agreed with US President Joe Biden at the sidelines of the NATO summit back in July. Wagenknecht even made meeting her foreign policy demands a precondition for entering into a coalition with the CDU, even though regional elections normally have no foreign policy nexus. Post-election polling by a public broadcaster, ARD, showed, interestingly, however, that foreign policy questions were non-topic to most voters. In Thuringia, only 5% overall said Russia and Ukraine was an important issue when deciding who to vote for. For BSW voters, it was 17%, more, but still less than a fifth. For the Left Party and the CDU vote was 5%, and for AfD voters only 3%. The same picture presented itself in Saxony. The topic Russia and Ukraine moved 7% of the voters overall, 8% for the AfD voters, 5% for Green voters, but again 21% for BSW voters, big in comparison, but again only 1/5. To look deeper into this nexus between foreign policy and the regional election results, I have the pleasure of welcoming two speakers this morning. With us is Katrin Buchholz, who is currently a guest lecturer at the Akademie for Politische Bildung, Tutzing, the famous Academy for Political Education in Bavaria. A career diplomat currently on a sabbatical, Katrin Buchholz has observed the election campaigns in both regional states, particularly in Saxony, very closely, and will share her impression and insights from on the ground, so to speak. Welcome, Katrin Buchholz. And also with us is my DGAP colleague, Dr. Stefan Meister. He's joining us from Tbilisi on a dodgy line, but we hope we have him at least for most of this session. Stefan Meister is the head of the Center for Order and Governance in Eastern Europe, Russia, and Central Asia. He is the German Council on Foreign Relations, Germany's leading expert on Russia. Stefan hails from Eastern Germany, and he will share his view this morning on the unusual foreign policy angle of these two regional elections. So welcome, Stefan, from Tbilisi. Some quick housekeeping remarks to start us off. I'll put questions to our two panelists. About 25 minutes in, we will be opening up for your questions and comments. For the Q&A, please raise your hand, introduce yourself, and put your question in person to the panel. You're also welcome to submit question comments via the chat function. Please note that the briefing is being recorded and will be published subsequently, and that we have to close on time at 9:15. And with a word of thanks to my colleagues, including Jan Stöckmann, Milan Nitsch, and others from across the DGAP, let's get started. And I would like to start with Stefan and ask, what role did foreign policy questions, the ones I already alluded to, Ukraine, Russia, the deployment of US rockets, played in these elections, in your view?
Good morning. Thank you for having me again. I hope the line is holding. I'm now on my mobile because I somehow have problems in the hotel with the internet connection, and it's sometimes disrupted. So I try to follow if I'm still with you. I have to say I'm from Thuringia by myself, so I traveled also 2 weeks ago in Thuringia. I was also at my home place, also mapping a little bit what is the election campaign about. Also in Brandenburg, I think we also followed a lot with which is the upcoming election. And in Saxony, I think we have to say, first of all, that Bündnis Sahra Wagenknecht, so BSW, made the Russia topic as one of the main topics of its campaign. So I would say it's more BSW than AfD who focused on this war and peace paradigm, very populistic election campaign. Where on one hand the leader of the party, which is not elected in both of the Länder, was the main face of the election campaign, but then also foreign policy topics, and this particular this question of support of Ukraine has become part of the election campaign. There was this demand also from Sahra Wagenknecht to if they would go into any coalition in both of the Länder, it should be with a coalition who is actively supporting diplomacy and ending the war as a precondition. So I think it was a very emotional, very polarizing election campaign with any answers, but just putting we are for peace and the others are for war. We had also AfD, AfD as had also this war topic in a very simplified form in the election campaign. But I think we can see also in the polls and also in the statistics that for AfD voters it didn't play such a big role. I think migration is the bigger role. Decoupling also from politics maybe in a broader sense. But I think it's rather migration than this question of war and peace, as Sahra Wagenknecht would take it. But still, I think it is a topic which, particularly in Eastern Germany, I would say, plays a role for the society. There is a more positive sentiment, let's say it like this, towards Russia. I think even more positive in this society with all the problems now and changes with the war. And I think there is a different also legacy on dealing with Russia in a way, but I think there is also an anti-American element, I think, which we also can see in the campaign of Sahra Wagenknecht. But I think what we also saw is that Sahra Wagenknecht's party did not take the votes from AfD mostly, but quite a lot from the Social Democratic Party. And I think we have to admit that there is part of the society who does not feel on this topic represented by the current government, by the current chancellor, and also by the Social Democratic Party in particular. So it is a topic in the society which is on one hand used in a very populistic way, demagogic way, I would even say, with Sahra Wagenknecht. So just putting these spotlights without having any kind of answers. But on the other hand, I think there is a sentiment, there is a feeling in the society, something is going wrong, this war is not ending, and the governing coalition is not really offering any options or any kind of, let's say, this discussion also on this. And I think for me, it has two sides. On one side, it's misused, it's polarized without any answers. On the other hand, I think there is a demand for discussions about where this war is going, what is our role in this war, and so on for the society. And I think there is a need, in my opinion, also to discuss it and not to give it to populists. We saw it also in Saxony with the Christian Democrats, but also I think Mario Vogt in Thuringia, he started to talk about peace. So I think what we see is that Sahra Wagenknecht is impacting from the through this local election. She's impacting on the national discourse also, on the support for Ukraine. And I think at the moment I don't see here any problem in this very important support for Ukraine. I just want to say this again. I don't see a problem because this is really local election. But I think the more this government is coming under pressure, the way also how they, in a very contradictory way, communicate to the society how much, also to the foreign partners in Ukraine, how much Germany supports or not supports, will have funding for this in the future, the more it makes it easier also for populists to use this topic to play it against the support policy of Ukraine. So I think the dysfunctionality of the graphic light coalition has now, in my opinion, also reached the Ukraine topic. And we saw it with this, the Liberal Minister of Finance as he has announced this. And I think it has become, because of this also problematic policy, it has become on the local level a bigger topic, but it will fire back also for the overall German debate. So maybe let
me stop you there. I want to discuss the repercussions for the national level in a second step. But before we do that in more detail, let's go to Katrin for a moment and ask her for her impressions of this sort of foreign policy entering Saxony and Thuringia in this way it did.
Good morning to everyone. Good morning, Henning. Thanks for the invite. Indeed, it's a challenging question, and it is a surprising question to me. As you mentioned, I'm on the sabbatical, so foreign policy is far away for me at the moment, but I indeed looked closely at the electoral campaign in Saxony. And having this look in particular to the electoral programs was interesting because there is contradiction. You mentioned the polls in the beginning, that the importance of these topics, especially Ukraine, was not that high for certain groups of voters. But before the elections, the three major local newspapers made a poll and asked what are the topics that will impact on the electoral decisions. And that the second most important topic indeed, with 41%, was the Russian war against Ukraine. So it's really puzzling in a way, not only because actually foreign policy, as we all know, is a federal competence and not a state competence. So when you invited me, I had a look to the papers, and indeed the electoral programs, they do have, even on state level, foreign policy issues, and peace is the one that is, as we would describe it as career diplomats, the one topic that is most foreign and security policy in itself. And there were different positions, as we all know. I will not repeat what BSW or the Link are very similar or close, at least, to what BSW is saying. Repeated here, but I want to make a slight remark on AfD, because they, in their local electoral program, they rather underline the sanction policy in this context. So it's rather an economic trade issue than a foreign policy issue. They want to stop, as we all know, the sanctions on Russia, or at least limit them. There are other two topics that I want to recall here when we talk about foreign and security policy, because they might become more important in the middle or long run, and that is migration, of course. That is a mixture or a mix of foreign and domestic politics or policies. There's border control, there's the ask for reforming the asylum legislation, there's financial issues, but also the question of deportation, where the states are very much involved, as we know. There, the Social Democrat Party and the Greens didn't mention anything in particular on the hard issues, I'd say, but it was very present in the programs of AfD and, of course, CDU, the Christian Democrat Union, and BSW. And the third topic, and I really was thinking about this topic because it might be more of a foreign policy, not only European policy, but foreign policy issue when we think of our relations to our neighboring countries, as we see these days with ongoing discussions in Berlin with state presidents and our federal ministers. The third topic, of course, is Europe. And this is, at least for Saxony, it's a very obvious topic as it is a border region. And the Greens had the ministry that was focusing not only on justice, but newly on Europe. And therefore, especially in the electoral program of the Greens, there was mentioning a lot of regional cooperation, but also the support of the Ukrainian accession to the European Union, the support for the reconstruction of Ukraine. So there's a lot of EU policy, especially within the Green electoral program, and then also in the program of the Linke, less so with the Christian Democrats, I have to say. So there is this contradiction. It is in the paper, but to be frank, I spent 3 days traveling through Saxony, participating in discussion events organized by the 3 local newspapers and the public institution on political training, the Landeszentrale für Politische Bildung. And the foreign policy topic was not present in these discussions. They decided, of course, to select several topics that were close to the heart to the voters. They again did a screening for this, and it was much more energy or education. Migration was part of the discussions, but not Ukraine as a standalone topic. And I say this because, again, it shows how much the discussions, at least in this public sphere, I'm not talking about the electoral campaign going from close door to door, there might be difference, can differ from what we have as an overall perception. I think the running candidate for SPD in Thuringia, he said that geopolitics was the dominant issue of the elections. I'm not that sure about this, though there is this general mood on certain topics as the stance on Russia. I close with one observation because I think this is important again. When we saw the television shows after the elections, it was said that this election, less than the last ones, is an election of protest. It's much more, especially with the AfD voters, an expression of confidence in their party. And I think this is also important when we think and discuss the topic of foreign policy. I leave it here. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And back to Stefan. We already touched on the sort of national implications. You mentioned that the question mark which arose, or actually the cutting of budgets and funds for next year, which are supposed to support Ukraine, this sort of all came up in the hot phase of the elections, maybe by chance, maybe not. Sort of, you already alluded to the repercussions you see. Might sort of, if the Scholz government is now becoming sort of unstable also on the Ukraine question, this might increase this insecurity. Did I get you right there? And what other sort of implications do you see for this sort of Berlin bubble or for the foreign affairs community?
So I'm in Georgia at the moment at an international conference, and I was asked a lot by US colleagues, discussed it with French colleagues, UK also colleagues. And if the reaction from the French side is, oh, you're now finally in the European normal. You're coming closer to where we are. And still, I think there's a big surprise that Germany, with its history, that it's possible to vote, you can say 45% for extremist parties, or in a right and left way on the local level. And I think there's a big also lack of understanding of Eastern Germany, why this is particular in Eastern Germany. So, and the whole question is how much is Germany divided? I just wanted to reflect on this because I think it's also for the German discussion, I think important. So I think there on one hand, I think there is a perception that this is getting like a normal in Europe, and it will not go away. I think it was also just said, it's not just protest. I think we see, especially with AfD, with BSW, we don't know. We see that they have a core electorate, and it is quite strong. They're doing very good also local work, where other parties are not present at all on the local level. And there are positions, I think, people share, and it does not mean that they are always extremist position, but I think they are part of it, yeah. So, and I think they're shifting here also in a way the red lines. But I think it's also, if we're talking about many topics, I think for many people, it is the feeling that the state is not capable anymore to solve certain kind of problems, to deal also with security. What happened in Solingen, for instance, I think it also plays into this in a way. So I think that's a discussion you have also on the local level. And then it's the whole question about the support for Ukraine, where we see also with this government, which is very dysfunctional, in my opinion, in many ways, not able to have a common position on key issues, and a good communication also on this. It's not only the chancellor, yeah, but it's also the chancellor. So, and I think we see now really that the Ukraine topic is also becoming a part of this dysfunctionality of this problematic communication among the coalition partners. And I would argue that this provides also ground for populistic parties to play with this and to challenge them with this, even if this is in many ways a right policy, what the government is doing. Yeah. So and I think in the situation where Ukraine is, I think it's very, very problematic, and I think it might really also undermine the consensus on one point for support, because people also feel this is an endless war, and there's no plan, yeah, from the government. And we have other problems like economic problems, energy prices, and so on. So I think it's really also a question of ability to act, but also a question how you explain. It's about consistency of policy, and I think we all understand what Sahra Wagenknecht demands will not just happen. If you want war, peace. We all want somehow peace, yeah. It will not just come because there's one actor who has no interest in this, yeah. But you need to deal with this. You need to debunk it, and I think this is also the task of the foreign policy community. This is the task of also of the expert community. First of all, to ask how. What are your concepts? And then also to really to debunk these kind of false promises which have no fundament, and have no explanation also how to do different policy. And I have the impression also there's maybe no interest also for Sahra Wagenknecht to go into the responsibility, because then it would be very quickly, on one hand, on the local level, she will see there's not so much foreign policy you can do, but also on the national level, it would be very difficult just to end the war with such an aggressor like Russia. So I think it's then also the question, and I think this is the big question which will, in my opinion, come up. Do not have these parties which have such a big support in parts of the society, when they, I think, should they not on one point be in the government, to also to be not to be able to have these populist statements without any kind of policy. You have to bring them also in a way in a responsibility that it's visible. It's not about wrong policy, but it's about a reality in which we are acting. And I think that will be an upcoming discussion. And I think what people also outside the country do not understand, why there's a big problem to do a coalition with AfD, but why there seems to be not such a problem to do a coalition with Sahra Wagenknecht party, which seems to be in some elements also quite extremist party, anti-American party also. and also questioning parts of the consensus of German foreign policy of the last decades. Yeah, so I think that's another discussion, I think, which will come. But I think our role is really to respond to this, to explain also with expertise that certain kind of things are not possible, to take this also serious. It's not just protest, as it was said, but there is a feeling in the society, and they play with this feeling, and we have to respond to this, and we have to take it also serious as experts.
Thank you very much. And Katrin, also please, on what kind of repercussions do you see for the national level? We're running a bit out of time, so maybe not too long, and then I would like to open it up. So have your questions ready, and if you are thinking of posing a question, do raise your hand now, and then I can plan accordingly.
Well, repercussions and recommendations then maybe together quickly. I think, yes, there was a strong sense about federal policy during the elections in Saxony, but not that much on foreign policy, to make this point clear. That's why the first repercussion is what we will see after the elections in Brandenburg. I think we will have to wait whether it was a complete loss for the traffic light coalition or not, whether we will continue with the lame duck coalition or we will see new staff. That is a very important repercussion that we will have to wait for in Berlin. The second thing, very technically speaking, I don't think that even if there were certain foreign policy positions in any coalition treaty, that they will impact in a technical way in Berlin, because there is no transmission belt for especially the Alliance Force of Sahra Wagenknecht. They don't have their representation party at the federal level yet. So I'm quite confident that this will not be a big pressure point for Berlin in a very formal sense. But widely, as mentioned by Stefan, I think the narratives about Germany, they will have the greatest repercussions and give us the most headache in the upcoming days. It's about an unstable democracy because it will take time to form this government. It will take time to see how the traffic light coalition reacts to that. And we have this allegation of fraud. So unstable democracy in Germany will be an issue that our diplomats have to deal with. The right-wing term is another narrative that will be very present in the international arena. And I think it's also important to react to. And the new foreign policy positions that might come up still will be a discussion point, as Stefan mentioned as well. My recommendation for Berlin would be to be modest when it comes to recommendation how the parties in Saxony or Thuringia should act now. There we might need to open up our discussions or our interest in minority governments. I think that's important. I think we have to explain very well that we don't shift our foreign policy positions, and I'm sure that the diplomats in Berlin have their lines to take on that. But thirdly, and this is probably my strongest point, talking more about the right-wing term, I think we need to refocus our political training in Eastern Germany. There has been a lot being done in the last years, but we see the outcome. So we have to rethink and rediscuss whether this was effective, and there, I think, especially young people, especially schools, are important to address. We need better methods. We need to train teachers. We need teachers in order to better prepare young people for complex issues, especially in foreign policy.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to open the debate. There's a hand up by Tom Nuttall from The Economist. Tom.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for doing this. I agree in my own reporting through these two states before the elections. There wasn't a lot of evidence that this issue proved especially animating for voters, although I did have the interesting experience at a Björn Höcke rally, talking to somebody who was complaining about local teacher shortages, this sort of hyper-local issue, who immediately pivoted to saying how absurd it is that we have all of this money for Ukraine and nothing for teachers. So it was interesting to see that kind of fusion of foreign policy and local issues. But a question, it's sort of also on this, what's the kind of the transmission mechanism, if anything, for this to national policy? And I wanted to know what the panelists thought about what all of this means for the CDU. It was clear in the run-up to the elections that Merz and the people around him decided sort of tactically to go quiet on Ukraine a little bit so that they could let Mikhail Kretschmer and other people pursue a slightly different rhetorical path. Does that matter? And in particular, if we see some fraught negotiations between the CDU and the BSW in one or both of the states, including on foreign policy matters, is there the danger of some sort of split between national and local parties? And just relatedly, these kind of conditions that Wagenknecht is setting for coalitions, which are kind of absurd, right, on the stationing of missiles, to have this as a condition of coalition talks in state politics. I wondered if either of you had a view on whether these conditions have been established before the elections, basically as a condition for failure, to set themselves up for failure so that the party doesn't have to take responsibility for governing and then can use the kind of the tailwind from that experience and then run up to the federal election next year when, of course, quote unquote, peace is a relevant issue.
Thank you very much, Tom. And let's also hear from Maximilian von Linden, if you could introduce yourself and then put your question to the panel, please.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, I'm Maximilian von Linden, current student of international affairs from Hertie School. And I was wondering, let's assume for a moment that the Wagenknecht party will end up in government in one or both states. And do you think if they will keep pushing for this foreign policy on a state level narrative, is that actually maybe also a chance for German federalism to get into a new kind of dynamic concerning foreign policy, which, as we have already heard, is usually made on the national level, but not the state level? So I would be very interested in your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then let's start with Stefan again.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to make this point again. I think for me, the main challenge is not in short-term political, but it is about the discourse and changing and refocusing the discourse and also playing topics like education, funding for education, and maybe even infrastructure against support for Ukraine. So playing against foreign policy and domestic policy. That's a very popular thing also for populists in other countries. And I think I see here a middle-term challenge also for the national level. I think the consequences for the CDU and I think Kretschmer in Saxony, I think is a long-term person in and one of the persons in the CDU who was always talking differently about Russia. I think we remember also before the war how he traveled to Russia and was talking differently about Russia, but also how he's now talking about peace and this war. So I think we have also let's say a kind of a split in the party. It's not a big it's not a let's say a powerful part in the Christian Democratic Party, and I think they still somehow moderated it internally, local level and federal level. So, yeah, and there's a very clear on the federal level, but I think it can also on one point divide the party, and on one point you have to supply also what you promise on the local level, then on the federal level. Yeah, if you're talking also about this question of war and peace. So I think there is a threat. I think we are not there yet with the Christian Democratic Party, and they perform quite well. And I don't think I think it's more because of maybe the national government performs not so well, yeah, or the governing coalition. But I think there is a threat, but I don't see it yet. I think at the moment they try to be flexible on the local level, but they are very clear, I think, and consistent, I would say, on the national level. And I don't see that there's a big change. I think with Sahra Wagenknecht party, we will have to see, because I think she has created like a Führer party, yeah, a leadership party where she decides everything. And we already see some frictions, and also that people on, I saw it also in Thuringia, they're very pragmatic people coming from the left party, and they have a different position also on many issues like she has. So I think we will have more conflicts also in this party. And I think my thesis would be rather, for her, it would be better not to go into the government. It's too early, and and if she's also so consequent as she seems to be, it will divide the party also on the Ukraine topic, but also on other topics. I just don't see in Thuringia at the moment, where it is moving, that any other coalition in a way, except with the left party, which the CDU is excluding. And I would say the left party is much more center party in Thuringia than Bündnis Sahra Wagenknecht, which is a bit strange in a way. But I think if there's no other coalition option, they will have to go, even if maybe they don't want to go, yeah, in a way. So, and I think that still has to be find out how much this is rhetoric, and then how realpolitik will look like with this policy, and how much maybe also there's this federal element playing a bigger role, that you have a bigger split also, and maybe also blocking in the second chamber also some decisions. But again, the the regional level has not much to say in foreign policy. It can, through the party, it can through the parliamentary system, impact on this. But again, I think it's the discourse. I think for me, it's really the discourse which is shifting, and that will then also have political consequences.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And Katrin, maybe you want to also come in on these questions, and maybe we should mention that there's a movement within the CDU now, including Ulrich Kiesewetter, who's a well-known foreign and security policy expert, sort of demanding a non-cooperation declaration on the part of the CDU, which includes the BSW. There is one in place which refers to the AfD and to the Linke, but not with the BSW. And just that sort of as a sign of sort of how things are presently going within the CDU. But Katrin, please.
Thanks, Henning. I think this is very important, actually, because this will be perceived in the eastern part of Germany a certain way. We saw that in the past, how national recommendations impact on the feelings of the people in the former DDR. So I think that's an interesting thing. And as I mentioned, minority governance maybe should be discussed because, and this is bringing me to the question, BSW is a black box. So I couldn't answer the question whether it was a trick to be so outspoken in this electoral campaign. But what I see is that we don't know the people. We don't know how they will manage to, fulfill all the recommendations or necessities when they come to power. So talking about BSW is very difficult. And as I mentioned before, I don't see that they will have a big impact with their positions in a technical way. Even in the second chamber, if we count the votes, it will not be enough to really impact in a very, very formal way. Regarding CDU, I think Kretschmer, at least in Saxony, he focused very much on the Greens in his campaign. So that might be a reason why he was not that outspoken on Ukraine. And then he, of course, tried to challenge AfW with very populistic rhetoric as well on migration. So maybe this is much more an explanation than anything else. Regarding the second question, I'm not sure whether the states will be a rising power in foreign policy, but I think that populist parties will be more maybe aggressive, or at least a headache to Berlin, to the Foreign Office than other parties. If you look at the electoral program of AfD, they want to open more offices. Saxony has 3 offices for the moment. They want to open 5 more. So we will see more people traveling, and that, of course, will underline their ambition on the foreign policy level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. We only got 5 minutes left now. We've got 2 hands up. I would prioritize those. There's Tom O'Donnell and there's my DGAP colleague Milan Nitsch. Please put your questions to the panel and be as short as possible. And then I have something extra for the last round. Tom, please.
Yeah, thank you. And Stefan, I think you're absolutely right about this cordon sanitaire, which in a way self-defeating. Even in academia, a number of places I've taught in Berlin, I couldn't invite the Linke or the AfD to be on panels so the students could even hear them. Quite interesting. I just wanted to say for perspective and see what Stefan and Katrin think. My opinion, coming from outside as an American for the last almost 20 years here, is I saw Germany as a country already sort of enthralled to populists, in this case, a very extreme form of green politics. And you can't have a serious discussion in Berlin, I'm sorry, about the oil and gas markets internationally or the Middle East politics, or what's the reality of all the 100% renewables and so forth. And it's very much a feeling as a country already enthralled to a certain kind of populism. And so it's not surprising that you get the other populism in reaction to a lot of that. And also, the Greens became emblematic for all the identity politics and other things too. Anyway, I'll leave it at this.
Thank you, Tom. Maybe you just explain who you are, sort of, for our.
Oh, I'm sorry. Tom O'Donnell. I'm with the Wilson Center in Washington, but I also teach here in Berlin at different places. I work on energy and international affairs.
Thank you very much. And Milan, please.
Yes, good morning. I think I can say that we had a discussion about election results in Thuringia and Saxony at the Forschung Institute. Some colleagues are here, so they can say that we were discussing that foreign policy is becoming part of campaigns and domestic politics, and what's attractive for new populist leaders, I mean, she's not new, like Sahra Wagenknecht, is the divisiveness of it. This is a mean to polarize and divide society. And part of it is also identity. So much deeper issues in Eastern Germany, in Thuringia. She's from there. She knows nitty-gritty things much better. For me, coming from Central Europe, this was very Central Eastern European campaign, like I know from countries like Czech Republic, Slovakia, where you try to connect with voters on emotions, on identity, on something that they feel not represented, as Stefan said, that is not part of the debate. There is a gap with political establishment, like on peace. And then it's very different. You are at a very different level to debunk it, to counter it. So rather than re-educating, people or voters or society there, you have to really look at what's driving it. And we don't have much time to maybe to discuss it, but my question would be if this is emergence of anti-Zeitenwende in East Germany, and what would be the impact exactly on Merz and on CDU? And second thing is about actually style of foreign policy debates and the role of think tanks. What can we do with very limited means we have when Sahra Wagenknecht chooses the topic of US missiles as part of deterrence, and she relies on deterrence, that there is a NATO. In some interview, she even said, oh, deterrence is there. While it's a bigger problem, also other European countries, including Germany, Italy, France, are going to produce missiles. It's not only Americans, but there is no space to actually discuss the real problem.
Thank you, Milan. You've given us a lot to talk about, which was just one minute left, but I'm sure Stefan and Katrin will do their best. And for good measure, just add one question from the chat from Delphine Neboyer from La Croix, a French newspaper, asking whether you see any connection between the cutting of Ukraine aid or the publication of that fact and the campaigns in Saxony and Thuringia. And I think that's probably more than enough for a final round. Let's start with Stefan again and then Katrin.
No, I don't think this cutting, if we can call it cutting, is a reaction to this populistic turn. It is rather in the logic of the budget bargaining between the traffic light coalition than that direction. This is also what I wanted to say before. Yeah, just to emphasize this again. I think this topic of support for Ukraine has become an element of the dysfunctionality of this traffic light coalition, and it has become a part of the bargaining and the fight for the budget for next year. And I think this is also undermining, in a way, the policy, support policy for Ukraine. And it will be used and is also used by populistic parties. Yeah, so I think that was the point. I think Milan made very interesting point, and we also discussed this. On one hand, I think it's a lot of this comparison with Central Eastern Europe or Central Europe and Eastern Germany. And I think Eastern Germany is in many ways closer to these other post-socialist countries than to Western Germany, I would say. I think there is a different understanding also with the question of identity, also of modernization of society in many ways. I think people are more hesitant with a lot of things. It's also about crises. People went through what they lost also with the wall, with the change after the fall of the Soviet Union and the communist system. So people are afraid of losing again everything with the current situation they feel with all these crises. And I think Sahra Wagenknecht is very much playing on these emotions also, on identity. She's very emphasizing these identity politics, but also these emotional elements, what matters for the people. And this is maybe not so, this is in the end, it's much more socioeconomic questions. But I think this topic of war and peace, how to deal with Russia and Ukraine, is emotionally somehow close to the people. And she's exactly playing with it in my opinion, very demagogic way. Yeah, it's the question with, I think you called it Anti-Zeitenwende. I don't know, what kind of Zeitenwende do we have, really? We have a kind of Zeitenwende, but how consequent it is in the end, really, and how far it is going. I think there is no strategy yet for a Zeitenwende in Germany. It's very much work in progress. It's very much reactive. This fund is somehow spent of 100 billion. So what comes afterwards? We will not reach the 2%, maybe even next year, in NATO spending. So I think the question is, what is really the Zeitenwende? And I think there's rather this demand also going back to the comfort zone, going back to when it was nice, like in the past, and we all didn't have all these problems and troubles. And I think this is also the legacy of Merkel policy, who created this impression that it will go on forever like this, and we don't need to have to change a lot of. And again, this government also has to deal with this legacy of Angela Merkel. It's very challenging with the crises which are going at the same time. And so I think it's again also the topic about the ability of politics to solve the current problems in the country and outside of the country. And the people feel there is a lack of ability to do so. And I think, again, this is space for populists.
Thank you very much. And Katrin, you've got the last word now.
Thank you. I will be short because I share the opinion of Stefan to the third question. The first was a statement, rather, I understand. But the second is very close to my heart because this is actually the question that I asked when I went to Saxony. The question of emotions in this electoral campaign and the rhetoric. It's on every topic. It was very popular, at least from the side of AfD, and then on foreign policy, especially on BSW. So my question was, how do the all parties, as the AfD calls them, the parties with a long parliamentary tradition, react on this? Do they objectify? Do they also use rhetorics that are populistic as the ones we see with these two parties, or do they put visions on the table that can help us to bring the discussions further? That was my actual research question, if you want to, not foreign policy as such. And I will not go into the details of my results, but I want to come back to your question: what can you do as foreign policy think tanks? I think it's very important to go and to discuss sur place, so go to the East and do these sort of discussions on very complex issues and emotions and identity, especially in this region, as I understand, a Central European think tank in Saxony. There is a great opportunity. I will be there, by the way, because my second half of the sabbatical, I will be in Saxony. I will be in Chemnitz. Chemnitz will be the European city of culture, the European cultural capital, and there will be a lot of things going on. I think there will be discussions, there will be also incidents, that's for sure, but it's a good place to be to explain foreign policy. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And with that, I thank our two panelists, Katrin Buchholz and Stefan Meister. Very glad that the line to Tbilisi held. Full points on that account. We covered a lot of ground, and maybe to the fundamental questions, sort of the interlinkage between popular mood or popular opinion and foreign policy. Maybe we do that on another day, sort of being mindful that key foreign policy decisions, at least in Western Germany post 1945, were sort of all made against the popular sentiment at the time. So we wouldn't have a Bundeswehr now if Adenauer, the Chancellor, then would have followed public opinion. But that's for another day. I thank you very much for being part of this briefing this morning, and hope to see you soon again at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Have a very good day.